Hello everybody, hope you're doing well, hope you all had an amazing weekend. We are on Lesson 7, Race and the American Dream today. Your day is going to start with a writing prompt titled Race in the Workforce. This will get your brain going for what we're going to be doing this week. And then I'm going to give a little lecture. After you watch the lecture, you'll go and do the Race and the American Dream assignment. The assignment is just going to be based on the lecture, so really pay attention to it. You won't be reading or watching any literature today, but we will do some of that on Wednesday and Thursday. So to start, here's your writing prompt, Race in the Workforce. Do you believe race should matter when someone is applying for a job? Why or why not? So do you believe race should matter when someone is applying for a job? Why or why not? Remember to use claim, evidence, and reasoning as you're responding to this question. Spend 5 to 10 minutes responding to this. Remember, get a good amount of writing, nice chunk paragraph. And when you're done, come back to this video and watch the lecture. So, race in America. Race has always been a big topic of discussion in America. After all, we are the great melting pot, and we have more diversity than any other country in the world. Today, we are going to talk about racism, institutional racism, and the relationship of race and the American dream. Now, I know you guys have probably been beat over the head by all this race talk over the last 6 to 10 months, but we'll dive into it briefly today and just touch on a few things, and we'll come back to it on Wednesday, Thursday, and throughout the semester as well. Hopefully, what I'm presenting to you is sort of fresh and new information that helps you think about the world in a little bit of a different way. So just to define, what is racism? To put it simply, racism is treating people differently based on their race. That is the simple definition of racism. Some people can write paragraphs on this and essays and books on the intricacies of racism, but at its core, that is what racism is. Looking at someone and treating them differently based on their race. As a society, we've decided racism is morally and ethically wrong, and beyond a microscopic percentage of people in the US, we are talking like 0.00% of people, everyone typically agrees with this, despite social media and the media as a whole constantly claiming that the country is widely racist. It is a small smidgen of people who are outwardly and actively racist in America. So here's some of the most common examples of racism if you're trying to think in your head what it looks like. Obviously, we have all these riots going on and people are making big claims. In fact, I don't know if anyone was paying attention this weekend, but just as I mentioned before, how the media likes to run with stories and put narratives out there, well, there was another breaking story this weekend, a case that had started riots and looting and had caused the deaths and injuries of many civilians because of it. It turned out that narrative wasn't true. And so maybe you guys know what I'm talking about, maybe you don't, but you'll see it every week. You'll see, or every few weeks, a giant narrative blown up by the media, and then the truth typically comes out. But all those people who were rioting and they were upset, their minds don't change because all of their emotions have already been preyed on, so they're sticking to their emotions regardless of the facts. Clay Travis, who's a very famous sports commentator and a lawyer, always says, what matters at the end of the day is the facts, and the facts. So wait to get emotionally invested when big stories come out and people are rioting over things until the facts come out. Very, very similar to the Jussie Smollett case. But as far as common racism on a day-to-day basis, here are a few of the most common examples. Hiring or not hiring someone based on their race. That would be racist. Lowering or raising standards for someone based on their race. Expecting someone to behave a certain way because of their race. And lastly, including or not including someone in something based on their race. So, as you can see, based on our definition of racism, right, these are all treating people differently because of their race. So these are the most common examples you see on a day-to-day basis. Now today, we're really going to talk about something called institutional racism. Remember this phrase if you haven't heard it before. I want you guys to think of this as a sub-branch of racism as a whole. There are other sub-racisms like subtle racism, reverse racism. Today we're going to focus on institutional racism because it's a buzzword that's been thrown around a lot lately. So what is institutional racism? Well, it's when any concrete systems are in place that benefit one or more races, thus causing a race or multiple races to be disadvantaged. For instance, the United States was an institutionally racist country up until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We had these Jim Crow laws in place that segregated and separated people based on color, specifically blacks and whites. This is really the last time institutional racism has existed in the United States from a governmental standpoint. However, even when the Civil Rights Act went into effect, it took decades and decades, and we're still working towards it as a country to completely eradicate racism. You know, it's almost impossible to completely eradicate someone like that because one person out there, a group of people might have some whack ideas that don't agree with it, but every single year over year, it's getting closer and more eradicated. But in the decades preceding the Civil Rights Act, racism did not go away. It was a long struggle to get to where we are today. Now I've got a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. there. That's when he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. It was right during this movement for the Civil Rights Act to take place. We will take a look at that speech on Wednesday, Thursday, okay? So we talked about how institutional racism governmentally was abolished in 1964. That's great. That's awesome. But does institutional racism still exist today? The buzzword is thrown around so often, you would assume yes. And the answer is yes, but not in ways you might imagine. Institutional racism can and does still exist today within schools, companies, and institutions of any type. And here are some modern examples that might shock you. Harvard University, okay? Everyone wants to go to Harvard. It's one of the best private schools in the nation, all right? However, you should know that Harvard still has policies in place that prevents certain students getting into the school based on race. Yes, this is happening, and there are people protesting it all the time, but you don't hear about it that much. But this is really where institutional racism can exist. Certain races, when applying to universities, are often required to have lower scores than other races in order to get into the school. Does that seem fair? No, that is a form of institutional racism. They on pen and paper, they have certain expectations that are different based on race. That is racist, treating races differently. Even at the high school level, a common sentiment is to grade students differently based on race. Does that seem fair to you guys? I don't think it is. I really don't think it is, but it's happening everywhere. It really is. On the administrative side of schools, districts, this is an MO that is being pushed. So this is something that you guys should be aware of. So why is the phrase institutional racism used so much today? Well, psychology has shown that people use ideas like institutional racism oftentimes to blame their own failures on an entity out of their control. Here's an example that might be more prevalent to you. Okay, imagine if you failed all your classes, but instead of taking responsibility for those failures, you decided to blame the school for being racist. Therefore, you deflect the blame from yourself to something else. I found a quote here that I really liked. It's easy to blame others for your situation. It's much more productive to search your own past and find what caused your faults. It is very, very easy to fail at something and just blame something else that's relatively out of your control that may or may not exist. Put the blame on it so you're not at fault. But this is typically where institutional racism is quoted today. When someone fails, it's very easy to say, well, my boss was a racist, the company is racist, the world is racist, what can I do? It's a victimship mentality that people really desperately need to get away from if they want to be successful, regardless of race. So as we come to the end of this, race in America is complicated, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussions on it this year, especially with everything going on, but race, the whole topic of it, the issue of racism, institutional racism, it's not so black and white, but we can learn to read situations and analyze situations logically and decipher for ourselves, is this racist or not? We're not going to decide if things are racist based on the media or social media yelling it in our face, or somebody else telling us something's racist because they heard it on the news, or something was taken out of context. We are going to be better people than that. And we're going to be advocates of standing up against racism. But we need to train ourselves to see what is and what isn't racist in our lives when we're reading things, when we're watching things, so that we can be ready to actively move against those notions as members of this society. So I'll wrap it up there. I don't want to go on for too long about it. I'll talk a little bit more about race on Wednesday, Thursday, and as I mentioned, we'll talk about it more throughout the year. But your job today is to go to Google Classroom, select the Race in America assignment, and answer the 3 questions using claim, evidence, and reasoning. Really, you're only going to answer the first and third questions using claim, evidence, and reasoning. The second one is me asking you for a question. And here's the assignment just so you guys have a look at it, all right? Question 1, what's one thing that piqued your interest in today's lecture? Why? So, what piqued your interest? What interested you? And why? Give me a nice paragraph for that. Cite stuff from the actual lecture. Number 2, what's one question you have about race in America that you'd like answered? And why did you choose that question? Thirdly, how has your race impacted your life experience? Explain. So that's all we have for today. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to pop into the chat and ask me, send me a one-on-one, send me an email, ask me in the video chat. Happy to help you guys. Hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I will see you guys in class.